So, the number one struggle that I hear from my listeners is that they struggle with overthinking everything. But you may not understand why you overthink things and how that affects you. In this episode, I'll be sharing some reasons behind your overthinking so you can understand the root cause. This is episode number 137, Why You Overthink Everything. Welcome to Calmly Coping. My name is Tati Garcia, and I'm a licensed therapist and coach specializing in high-functioning anxiety. I help high achievers stop overthinking everything so they can feel calm, balanced, and confident from within. If this topic interests you, then please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get notified whenever I release a new episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. So first, let's talk about what happens when you overthink. I mean, you might already kind of have an idea of what goes on for you personally when you overthink things, but I just want to describe it to make it more tangible, something that you can start to recognize within yourself, because a lot of times overthinking can become something that is habitual. And so the same way that other habits that you have just become automatic and things that you do without even thinking about them, like brushing your teeth every day, for example, overthinking can become a habit like that. So it can become something that you have learned that at some point you found, or your brain has found that it was helpful for you in some way. And so you just continue doing it. And so there can be certain purposes and reasons for why you do that. I'll be sharing that in a little bit. So first, what happens when you overthink? So your mind could wander. So maybe you can end up going down rabbit holes. You start thinking about one thing like, oh, what if I mess up in this meeting tomorrow? And then your mind ends up in another place completely, like, I'm going to lose my job. And even though in your mind it might seem like it makes sense to go from one conclusion to the next, if you take a step back, you can realize that oftentimes our minds kind of just do their own thing, and we don't necessarily feel like we have control over where those thoughts are going. So you might feel like you're kind of going into this downward spiral of having all of these negative thoughts, or all of these worries, or all of these scenarios coming up in your mind when you overthink things. You might also struggle with difficulty being present when you're overthinking, because when you're overthinking, you're probably not paying attention necessarily to what's going on around you, but your attention might be really in your mind, focusing on all of these thoughts that are going on. And so that might make it harder to be and to feel as though you're fully there for what's happening in front of you right now. So we can get caught up in our heads and in our minds. So you might get caught up in what's going on in your mind and really focused on that. And that can make it harder to pay attention to what's in front of you. So if you've ever had the experience where like you're taking a shower and you're planning out what you're going to say in a conversation you're having with somebody after you take a shower, or you're planning out what you're going to do for the day or what you're going to have for breakfast while you're standing in the shower, that's an example of you not being present. So your mind is not present in the shower. Your mind is in that meeting, or your mind is in the kitchen preparing food. And so when our minds are going into other places and we're not fully present, we're not actually experiencing our lives. And so that can be another thing that can happen with overthinking, is that it takes you out of your present moment experience of actually being there for the good and the bad moments of your life. Another thing that can happen when you overthink, I kind of touched on this in the first one when I talked about going down those rabbit holes, but your mind can tend to go to the worst case scenario. So oftentimes when our minds are overthinking about things, especially when you're a person who is struggling with high functioning anxiety or anxiety in general, you can tend to focus on the negative. And it can seem like the worst case scenario is definitely going to happen, and you might really be focused on all of the bad consequences that might occur. And so this is not always reflective of reality. And so that's why it can feel so uncomfortable, because even if you might logically know, oh, maybe this will happen, maybe it won't, your emotional part of your brain makes it feel so urgent and so important, like you must pay attention to this, because what if this does happen? So that can be another thing that can happen when you're overthinking things. And another thing that might happen when you're overthinking is you might try to mentally rehearse and plan for every possible scenario, especially if you're somebody who really enjoys planning things and thinking of what could possibly happen. What's every possible scenario? If I say this in this conversation with this person, what if they react in this way? Or what if they say that? Or what if they think that? Or how are they going to interpret this? Or any situation that might occur. And so we can sometimes feel like we need to prepare for every possible outcome just so if, that thing does happen, we'll be prepped and we'll know how to respond. When really with overthinking, with anxiety in general, the more you tend to overthink things and the more you tend to mentally plan, it actually makes you feel worse because you're focusing more on what could go wrong and it can actually increase anxiety. So I want to give you one example of me overthinking things. Sometimes what happens, because I've done so many podcast episodes at this point, and honestly, this happened in the beginning, probably even more, but it still comes up from time to time, that sometimes I will overthink the topics or what I'm going to talk about in a podcast episode. Sometimes I get stuck in this perfectionism. Like if I'm going to talk about a topic, okay, well, I really need to research it. I need to make sure I cover every aspect of the topic because this is going to be out there forever. Or, what if I say something and then I end up changing my mind later? Or what if I don't cover every single possible person's circumstance when I'm explaining this thing? Or, it could go on. And then sometimes that overthinking gets me stuck in procrastination, paralysis by analysis, which is that feeling of like feeling paralyzed, feeling frozen because you're kind of overthinking and analyzing things. And I recognize that pattern in myself. And so what I tend to do in those moments is practice what is called positive self-talk. So I have this part of me that's like overthinking all of the things. And then I have learned and made it a habit to come back with this positive self-talk to combat that overthinking and to let myself know, okay, if this thought is coming up that, I need to research all of the things about this topic and think of every possible circumstance or scenario, I will come back with positive self-talk, recognize that that thought is unrealistic, and then tell myself it's not realistic for me to research every aspect of this topic. It's not possible for me to cover every single person's scenario or think of every single thing I could possibly say in one moment, and kind of just help myself to see it's okay. Whatever I put out there, I'm doing the best I can in this moment, and that's okay. I can't predict what might change in the future. I can't predict how people might perceive what I put out there. So I'm just going to focus on doing the best I can right now, showing up and just doing the thing. And when I take action and do the thing, then oftentimes that will help to decrease the overthinking because then I'm just like, all right, I've committed to this. I'm taking action on this. So that is one thing that helps me and that has helped the clients and students that I've worked with in kind of reframing that overthinking and bringing in some positive self-talk and thinking of, what would I say to a friend in this circumstance who was being hard on themselves or who was, expecting perfection from themselves. All right, so now that we've talked about that, I want to quickly share something that I'm excited about. So it's a brand new resource that I have created. It is called the Calm Your Mind Challenge. And essentially, this is a 15-day challenge where I will walk you through simple daily habits that you can utilize in order to calm your mind when you struggle with overthinking things. So these are simple steps that you can take to help you feel lighter and more at ease daily. If you're the kind of person who tends to overthink things, think of the worst case scenario, be really hard on yourself, then I think this will be really helpful for you. And it's not overwhelming. It's something that's super simple and you can put into action immediately. You can download that for free by going to calmlycoping.com/calm. I will also leave a link in the description and the show notes depending on where you are tuning in. All right, so now let's get to the juicy part of this episode, some reasons why you might overthink things. So a big overarching reason is fear. So I was trying to think of all of the possible scenarios where people might overthink things. Of course, I can never think of all of them, but in most, if not all of the ones I was thinking of, fear is a huge component. So it could be, for example, fear of failure. So maybe if you are afraid of, not doing well at an interview, you might overthink and kind of try and think of, well, what if this happens, or what if I fail, or whatever might happen. And so that can be at the root of overthinking in that situation. So because you're so afraid of failure, then you may try to think things over in your mind in order to try and help yourself to prevent some form of failure, in order to try and feel like you're taking some sort of action, especially when you feel anxious and helpless and out of control of the situation. Another fear could be of judgment. So maybe you're afraid of what people might think of you. Maybe you're afraid that they're going to look at you negatively or critically. And so then you might overthink things about yourself. So maybe you might kind of be hyper vigilant of the way that you're coming across to others. And then there's this inner monologue of like, oh, did I sound stupid when I said that? Or they must think I'm so awkward. This happens a lot in social anxiety. And even if you don't struggle with social anxiety, this can happen because we all want to be accepted by others. We all want to be liked. I should say, most of us want to be accepted and want to be liked by others. And so that fear of judgment can show up as overthinking things. Another fear could be negative consequences. So let's say if you fear something bad happening. So this kind of ties back to what I was speaking about earlier. So fearing the worst case scenario from happening. So if you are worried about negative consequences, like something bad happening to a loved one or getting fired at work or getting into a car accident or anything else like that, you might overthink things as a result of trying to, again, mentally get some sort of sense of, okay, if I think about this enough, then it won't be such a shock to me when it does happen and I'll feel ready for it. When that's not what happens. That's not the case. We are often more prepared to cope with things than we think we are. And B, like I mentioned earlier, overthinking things does not make you any more prepared. It often just makes you more anxious and less present in your life. Another fear could be of regret. So let's say if we look back at the podcast episode example. So maybe I'm afraid of regretting that I could have done better. Like I could have done a better job. I should have done this, kind of like the shoulds, the woulds, the coulds. And so then you might overthink things as a way of trying to prevent that feeling of regret that might come later on down the line. And again, this is not a helpful way of looking at things because you can't predict the future. You can't control how you might feel about something in the future or go back and say, I should have done that, because you're really just putting more undue pressure and stress on yourself about something that can no longer be changed. Another reason why you might overthink is a lack of faith in your ability to cope. So when I was talking about thinking of worrying about negative consequences, if you aren't confident that you can cope with something negative that happens, so whether it is a failure, whether it is a tragedy in your life, whatever else it might be, whatever degree it might be, it doesn't matter how huge it is or how small it is. If you're not confident in your ability to cope with that and to persevere through that, then you may overthink as a way of, again, trying to cope with things internally and mentally and preparing yourself for what could happen. And the fact of the matter is that you can cope with whatever comes your way. And so oftentimes it can be the emotional experience. So it can be that we're afraid of the shock that can occur when something bad happens, or the thoughts that we have towards ourselves. So more overthinking of like the regret or the shame or whatever else might happen. And so if we're not confident in our ability to cope with negative consequences, to persevere through discomfort or difficulty, then there may be more overthinking that's coming up as a way of coping with that and compensating for that. But the reality is you can cope with whatever comes your way. And really the important part is having that faith and belief in yourself that, you know, whatever has happened thus far, even if it's been difficult, even if it's been uncomfortable, you've persevered and you've made it through. And you can continue to do so with what's coming your way in the future. I've mentioned this probably in all of them that I've talked about, but one major reason why you might overthink things is trying to get a sense of control. And I like to call it a false sense of control, because that's what anxiety does. It gives us this false sense that we can control something about the outcome, something about the bad things that happen to us. And if we just think about them enough, or if we just plan about them enough, then we can deal with it better, or we can prevent that bad thing from happening, or whatever that belief might be, when this is not true. And I feel like I'm repeating it, but just to drill it home, overthinking things does not give you more of a sense of control. When it comes to planning, and if you're actually taking action and practically doing things to prepare for whatever it is, that's going to be helpful. But anything beyond that, when you've already planned for something, or if you're not actually taking action and doing something, but you're just mentally going over things in your mind and they are negative thoughts, then that is not helping you. That is not giving you any more of a sense of control over things. And another reason why you might struggle with overthinking is perfectionism. I touched touched on this before in my example about wanting like the perfect podcast episode on a topic. So if you are looking for the best choice or the right choice, this can really get you stuck in that paralysis by analysis, that overthinking of like, okay, let me look at all of the options. One simple example is if you've ever gotten stuck in the rabbit hole of like reading reviews for products online. Let's say you're trying to choose something. I know you've all probably been there where you're looking at all of the reviews and trying to compare, okay, what's the best one? And like, this has 4.5 stars, but there's some pretty bad 1-star reviews on here. What am I going to do? I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to me, or I make the best choice. So that can be an example of that like perfectionism of wanting things to be perfect and not experiencing any sort of difficulty as a result. And another reason why you might overthink is a lack of confidence. So this kind of goes hand in hand with fearing judgment, but if you aren't confident in yourself and your ability to do whatever it is that you have to do or show up confidently, or you have some insecurities, then that might result in you overthinking and being that kind of observer of yourself. That might result in you overthinking things about yourself and worrying, did I do this wrong? Or what are other people going to think of me? Or I should have more education. This can really show up in imposter syndrome when you feel like you're worried that you're not qualified for something and people are going to find out. So that can be another reason why you overthink things. So this, of course, is not every possible reason why you might overthink things. I could never possibly cover every single reason, but these are just a few of the common ones that I have noticed in my personal and professional experience. And I'm curious to hear, are any of these reasons things that resonate with you? And if they are, you can let me know in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, you can join our free Facebook community, Calmly Coping, and share your thoughts there with why do you think you overthink things? Which of these reasons resonates with you? Maybe it's all of them. And that is perfectly typical because all of them are pretty common, especially if you are listening to this podcast and resonating with the messages that I share. You can join that group by going to calmlycoping.com/group. And as your action tip for this episode, I'd like you to choose one thing that you have been overthinking recently and really write it down, journal on it, and reflect on why you think you were overthinking that thing. What do you think was at the root of that overthinking for you? And I think this can really help to bring some clarity as to why you might overthink the things that you do and help you to dig deep and try to understand yourself more. And if you're looking to dive deeper, then you can download that free resource I discussed, that Calm Your Mind Challenge. It is going to be available for free if you go to calmlycoping.com/calm. While you wait for next week's episode, I have other episodes about decreasing anxiety, adopting a healthy mindset, and managing your time and energy. So be sure to check out these episodes here. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, be calm.